Dialogues of Learning lecture series, and he happens to be my hallmate, actually next door to me in Freiburger. Dr. Ferstle is presenting on digital humanities. I don't know if you saw the clip in NBC News Nightly, and it's on our webpage as well, but I guess Lynn has made some notoriety with being on the cutting edge. And certainly Dr. Ferstle brings that to our faculty and our curriculum because he examines Lynn University's use of the Apple iPads in the Dialogues of Learning in the curriculum, and also to highlight here in his address the consequences of teaching and learning in a digital age. So he's really examining what it means to be a digital university in pedagogy. Now, Dr. Ferstle comes with many years of experience, not only in teaching, but also in the marketplace. Actually, he spent 20 years selling industrial battery systems and uninterruptible power supply systems in the international marketplace before returning to school, where he earned his PhD from the University of Texas in Dallas. He actually earned a PhD in the humanities, so he brings corporate America to the classroom. His research interests include the evaluation and assessment of first-year multimodal writing, social network analysis, and artificial intelligences. Sounds like a man of the future, if you ask me. He's, however, very grounded in that he's also a poet. He's a short fiction writer. I've actually had the privilege of reading some of his poetry, and it is really delightful. He also brings not only the head, but also the heart, I believe, to the faculty, which I see is mostly well represented here today in the humanities. But Tom, actually, I was impressed in reading his vita. He brings also a certain passion about, doing something good for the universe, making a difference. I'm just going to point out not only does he serve on the board here for spiritual and religious life, but he's a board member, the academic seat on the Coalition to End Homelessness in Broward County. He's been on that board since 2008. Tom, it's a privilege to introduce you as a friend and as a colleague, and for you to present to us Digital Humanities.
Good morning. I'm Tom Ferstle. I'm an assistant professor of writing at Lynn University. I teach in the Dialogues of Belief and Reason, Justice and Civic Life, and the occasional contemporary ethics course. I wanted to make a point of thanking everyone who's here. I want to thank Dr. Carter Tellison and Dr. Robert Watson for sponsoring and looking over these Dialogue of Learning speaker series. I also want to thank my DJC 100 class, who had to endure the very rough version of this same lecture that I'm about to give you. They had lots of encouraging feedback for me, much of which they had received from their professors here at Lynn University, so I'm grateful for those faculty as well. The topic that I'd like to talk about today is the digital university, and by that I mean the impact of technology in our classrooms and also technology in our institution and how it reflects certain kinds of cultural values and assumptions that we have. The interest that I bring to this, as Mark had noted, and thank you for your introduction too, Mark, is that in my corporate background with experience in the electronic industry, when I started in graduate school, which wasn't actually that long ago, I only received my PhD in 2007. So really, in academic terms, I'm about 35 years old if I had followed a more conventional path. I'd like to sort of examine this topic about the impact of technology in our classrooms in the institution by citing a couple examples of my experience while I was in graduate school as a way of sort of opening up a set of problems and issues that I think we face in the classroom and here at Lynn as an institution. While I was in graduate school, I had the opportunity of serving as a teaching assistant under Dr. Cynthia Haynes, who's now the director of writing at Clemson University. Dr. Haynes and her husband had developed and created a program called Lingua Mu. The MOO, M-O-O, stands for Multi-Object Oriented Web Language. The MOO is actually sort of a predecessor of what we now also call MOOCs, which are the massively open online course environments that have become quite popular and have received a lot of press in the headlines. What this allows is a graphical user interface, as you can see up here in the corner, and then you can add slides and presentations on the other side. So you can have users online at the same time the teacher is presenting and so forth. Now this seemed to me to be quite an extraordinary software, and I was so excited. Here you can see some of the graphics are rather rudimentary. As you can see, here's the blackboard representation, Aristotle, the teacher's desk, the left table, the right table. We could put in coffee pots, and people would come in and out, as noted on the side here, and then they could chat. I thought this was quite an amazing piece of software, and I, during the course, at the end of the course, I asked my students to reflect on the use of it. Their response was a little bit not quite what I had expected. One of my students complained that basically what I had done with this technology is recreated the cubicles that he and his fellow students after graduating would probably soon occupy. So it was just a virtual representation of a physical space. And as you can see, there's a point to what he's saying. Even in the lines, the geometry of the space has been sort of replicated. I recognized the validity of his criticism immediately. Still, I was quite excited about this technology. The next example that I want to give you, I'm calling this problem the virtual cubicle problem. The next experience that I had in graduate school had to do with my research. I was very interested in how faculty and instructors were going to evaluate these new multimodal compositions that students could construct. By using their computers, they could add images, videos, soundtracks into a written document. Previously, in all of our academic history, when professors of writing were evaluating and assessing student writing, it was just simply text. Textual analysis, and all of the principles and traditions we developed about examining these weren't adequate to comprehend the use of visuals in the same kinds of documents. And so I conducted a series of interviews with the instructors at the university about their expectations and assumptions. This is one of the transcripts that I accumulated. I accumulated a ton of these transcripts of these interviews, and I sat down like any good researcher and began to highlight the significant passages physically with a little highlighter, highlighting phrases, significant concepts, and I thought, there's gotta be a better way of analyzing this data. And so I began looking for some software packages that would help me do this. I was looking for technology to aid me in the interpretation of these texts. The qualitative analysis software packages that were available were relatively new, and they were very expensive. As a teaching assistant, graduate student, I didn't have a lot of money at my disposal, and so I went looking in another direction. And I found a package constructed by Kathleen Carley at the Carnegie Mellon Institute for Computational Analysis of Social and Organizational Systems. This was a group founded there that was using network analytic software for the first time. These were the first times we were beginning to use social network analysis. She was aided by a fellow by name Mike Palmquist, who was the director and still is the director of the online writing laboratory at Colorado State University. And when you use this particular kind of software they developed, I was able to take these transcripts, load them up and create matrices, and the matrices I could then convert into drawings that look like this. This is a network map. And basically what this does is take the very words that I was interested in finding out, the assumptions, the critical concepts and phrases, and convert them into an image, into a picture. At once, I could see the value in this kind of a drawing. The diagram here in the center, these are the most critical concepts. These are the central ideas that inform the instructor's ideas and the assumptions that they had about assessment. The concepts that are on the margin out in the very far ranges of this solar system of ideas are more marginal concepts. They're isolated from the center. All of the concepts, in most cases, are connected in various ways. Through the use of the links, the location of the concepts themselves, you can begin to interpret how an instructor feels about the notions regarding assessment, what they value most about a student writing. I was very impressed. So out of a very complex map like this, you can isolate individual concepts and create what are called ego nets. So these are specific ideas and the relationships that are most important. I thought this was fantastic, and so I created this huge dissertation research project, and I presented it to my committee. And one of the things, before I show you the committee's response, this is an example of the power of very large data sets that are being manipulated now. You can see the interaction that can happen by using these graphical interfaces. You can take this particular set, as a matter of fact, is an agent knowledge network regarding decision making for people. Who do you go to ask for advice on one particular idea or another? So you can take a large data set and display it. You can burrow down into the network and focus in on specific relationships. And so it's a very powerful kind of application that's going on nowadays. As a matter of fact, in the original days when Carly was using this software, the NSA and the CIA became very interested in this kind of agent network analysis and used it to track the terrorists after 9/11. My dissertation committee was divided in their opinion of my research. One half thought, this is fantastic, this is amazing stuff. The other half thought, this is terrible. My critics thought that this was a terribly reductive, deterministic way of looking at language, at looking at ideas. To convert a narrative transcript in this way, they found to be appalling. They also admitted that they didn't actually have the technical skills to evaluate the methodology on its own merits. So they came to a compromise with me and allowed me to go ahead and include the concept mapping in the dissertation, but I also had to include a traditional grounded research method, which many of you probably have had to use in your own research at one time or another. I'm calling this problem the divided committee problem. Out of these experiences then, what I'd like to talk about is this virtual cubicle problem, this problem that we have where we recreate the commercial industrial context that in college and the university we're actually exposed to examine and interrogate and be critical of. This technology shapes our personal and our professional identities as well. On a larger scale, the divided committee problem, this has to do with a set of issues related to the role of the university in our community, and it has to do with the purpose of the university overall. This notion about, are we trying to provide good citizens as a result of their education, or are we providing skill sets so that they can enter the economy? This has to do with a historical conflict about the historical conflicts between the stakeholders in the university. The big set of problems is obviously nothing new in history. This has happened since the very beginning of the university. Here are some images from the University of Paris regarding the student rebellion in 1229, shortly after the university was founded. The students, over time, several years previously, had been complaining about professors either not showing up for their lectures or showing up drunk, or not covering the pertinent materials or omitting material that they thought was especially significant and important. They were trying to complain about this. Students, like all students of any generation, after they finished complaining, they went to the bar in the streets of Paris, and they had a problem with a particular bar owner. The bar owner threw them out, so the students returned, trashed the bar. The city officials were called in to oversee the problem, and several students were actually killed. In trying to sort out the problem, the students complained that they were not subject to the authority of the municipal police, but rather they were subject to the Pope. After all, it was the Catholic Church who had given the decree and permit for the university to exist in the first place. And all the members of the school were clergy, and the students were also considered to be learning to be members of the clergy as well. So they were looking for divine intercession of sorts. The city of Paris made a compromise with the Pope. They took over the payments to the professors, the faculty, and thus basically taking control of the university. Since then, the university has changed in a lot of ways, but in many ways, we continue to have a kind of medieval model of the university. What I'd like to argue over the next section of this talk is that the commercial and industrial interests, the stakeholders in the university, have changed significantly. These are some graphs about the investments in technology at all stages of education. At Lynn University, with the adoption of the iTunes University, the iPads, and the iBook initiatives, one of the first encounters that we have as an instructor or as a student when we open up our iTunes University courses is that we are greeted by this message: sign in to the iTunes store. What I'd like to argue is that that is a significant message that we are sending to our students about the nature of the education that they're about to receive. And so, as a matter of fact, what I would call this is the iBook as a kind of mall. In a mall, you have corner stores like J.C. Penney's. In our iBook, these corner stores are our seminal texts that we use, such as the Aristotle or Plato's Republic. The specialty stores that you encounter in a mall are the analog in our iBook, of course, are these Socrative applications, the little notes and research, the links to iTunes University, and YouTube videos. Those are the specialty stores that we've included in our books. One of the features of the mall is that you can enter the mall, you can examine the merchandise, you can pick it up, you can look at the merchandise, you can buy some of the merchandise, but you can't change the design of the store. You can't change the mall. The owners of the mall is Apple Corporation. In this way, Lynn University is a kind of franchise holder of a set of stores in a mall. They are also involved in the ownership of this educational environment. This becomes problematic on a number of levels that relate to our culture in this particular time and day. As our traditional public spaces are being replaced by private concerns and private developments, some cultural critics, such as Margaret Kahn, in a book about neighboring spaces and how they've changed over time, notes that community is an appealing alternative to public life. It promises to provide the pleasures of sociability without the discomforts of the unfamiliar. And so this space that we provide our students in some ways provides them with this replica, this recreation of our current cultural gated community life, where we provided them with sort of commercial interests and so forth without the discomforts of being in a public space. The public space has become our malls. The de facto public space is the mall. Problem is that the mall is not a public space. Not all behavior, not all speech is protected there. This is an example of protest of the shooting of Michael Brown at the Mall of Americas in Bloomington, Minnesota. After the protest occurred, the mall owners alerted the local police. The police were called, arrested the demonstrators, and afterwards charged the demonstrators and the organizers with the lost revenues to the stores in the mall. So this is one of the problems that you have with a misconception that we have about the nature of public space. And so in some ways, this is a funny territory that we find ourselves in creating this sort of virtual space as if it were a public space, when in fact it is not. Not anything can be said there. These technologies have rhetorical limits. All of these applications that we provide our students contain and limit what can be said, who the speakers are, and who the viewers and listeners are. There are a number of problems too that we encounter have to do more with the practical problems in the classroom. This has to do with recent research about multitasking, which has been found to increase the production of cortisol. These are stress hormones, and adrenaline. This is the fight or flight hormone. The production of dopamine leads to an addictive feedback loop. It's very pleasing. Apparently there are endogenous opioids that are produced in our brain every time we click on something or answer an email or a text. Our prefrontal cortex has, in fact, a novelty bias where we prefer something new over the thing that we've been looking at. So we tend to love to be distracted in some ways. Here's another problem. Knowing that you have an unopened email or a text that you haven't returned actually lowers your IQ by 10 points. Now, for some of you, that's not necessarily a significant proportion. However, for many of us, that's a significant decrease in our available intellectual capacity. Information obtained while multitasking is actually stored in a different part of the brain called the striatum, which is normally associated with the acquisition of procedures and skills. Typically, when someone is learning facts or ideas, these are normally stored in the cerebellum or in the cerebrum, which have greater numbers of connections for associations. Some argue that this is the way that we are becoming kind of new creatures, new humans and so forth. You can see these images. Here's a baby with a set of buds in his or her ears. All these children are being raised in and around this technology now. We call our students, this generation, digital natives because they've been raised in these technical environments. This is fantastic stuff. It's so easy to get excited about technologies and all the fantastic things that they offer us. Transhumanism is a set of philosophies about the notion of the effect of technology and the future of the consequences of this kind of technology in our lives as it relates to us being human. There are so many ways that technology has come to aid us, everywhere from these implants for intraocular implants, intercochlear implants for hearing impairments, for visual impairments, for prosthetic limbs, which are even controlled by implants directly into our brain. So there are very many ways that technology has extended our abilities when those abilities have been impaired or lost for one reason or another. I want to give my hats off to Apple, whose products and software also includes all of these kinds of affordances for hearing impaired and vision impaired persons. Our PDFs have the ability to be read to our students who have difficulty reading them. The files that are available through Apple and software can be created into Braille files for people who can't see as well. And so there are many different kinds of ways that this technology really does afford us many opportunities. Douglas Rushkoff is a researcher on all things digital. One of the things that he warns about this technology here is a quote on his blog. If you don't know how the system you are using works, chances are the system is using you. Rushkoff reminds us that technology is always on, 24/7. They're machines. They're waiting for our input, waiting for us to wake them up. Just a brush of our hand across the surface of the iPod lights up the screen. Any information that we ever need to know at any time, anywhere, we can access immediately. But we are not creatures like that. We have circadian rhythms. We have evolved over all of the Earth's history. We are humans in a way that these machines are not. These technologies have a great impact, and they're changing what we think about ourselves as human, and they're changing all of the kinds of ideas that are associated with our institutions, such as learning and so forth. Here's a little video I wanted to play you that I show my students. Michael Wesch, an anthropologist at Kansas State University. So Wesh has done a number of different videos using his class as a representative of this changing culture of ours and the impact of technology in our lives. In terms of rethinking scholarship, even here at the university, in our retention, our dismissal committees, the promotion and advancement of rank, we have to reconsider what we've always considered traditional scholarship, which has had to do with a print or a manuscript world, and now to consider the fact that these digital technologies that make us available to publish on the internet in various different kinds of forums also contain the same kinds of skill sets that we have traditionally valued, but there are different media, different forums. This causes us to rethink the way we consider and evaluate each other's work as faculty. Another area, certainly this faculty has had to reconsider, is teaching in the classroom. All of these different technologies change the way we think about our courses. All of the previous courses that I taught just last year had to be rethought in terms of the iBook and using that technology in the Apple TV in the classroom. Why do we have to change? As Dr. Cox is fond of saying, because we have to. We are responding to economic and cultural situations that we're involved in our current world. This is a graph on the left side. You have a column regarding men and unemployment, depending on their degree of education, and on the right column is women. The bottom graph represents those with a college degree. They have the least levels of unemployment. So that's the good news. If you have a college degree, you're better off. The problem is that you might be a waitress at Applebee's. The college degree, it doesn't necessarily translate into a good job these days, but it may even translate into a minimum wage job. In fact, this particular situation has been rising over the last 5 to 10 years. This is exaggerated by the problem of student debt and tuition costs. These have virtually doubled over the last 10 to 15 years. And so the chance of getting out of college with a college degree and ending up in a low-paying job with a higher level of debt has been increasing. This is a situation that we do have to address as an institution. Some of the things that I'm doing in class, when Michael Lewis and I developed the DBR 200, the Belief and Reason iBook for this year, we included samples of student work in the iBook. These files, I believe, this is the first step in creating a text environment that students also can construct in and contribute to. I have an idea that perhaps these books will begin to become places where students actually develop a series of commentaries that continue to persist after they finish the class, and the succeeding classes that follow them in these individual courses continue to construct a body of commentary, criticism, links, resources surrounding our textbooks that we use. So in fact, they begin to construct the texts of their learning themselves. Here's a picture of Marissa Tandron, one of our top students. This was included in our DBR 200 iBook along with a sample of her essay. Another thing that I had an opportunity to be involved in was the Millennial Campus Network, which was sponsored by Lynn this last year. This conference is uses an association, a conference, and a network of students from all over the world to address UN development goals. This inspired me to reconsider the prompts for the writing and the work that I do in my classroom to address the problems that we have in this world. Poverty, hunger, human rights, income inequalities, environmental sustainability. These are the issues that our students will be facing in their lives, and this seems to me a good opportunity for us to begin to practice our thinking and our responses to these problems in the classroom. Being a teacher in the dialogues in the humanities, we share a number of problems which we've inherited. We stand in a long tradition of professors and lecturers teaching these ancient texts. James Elkins of the Art Institute at Chicago wrote a book that I quite enjoyed on art history called These Beautiful, Dry, and Distant Texts. He begins, as a matter of fact, with an epigram from the Phaedrus, where Plato is being questioned by the student Phaedrus, supposedly about the nature of love, but he begins the question by asking if Plato believes in all of these fantastic stories of the mythologies that they have to read as students and are part of the Greek culture. Plato avoids the question by suggesting to him it's not so important whether I believe in these mystical and mythological figures as to whether my character is more like the terrible monsters or one of the more gentle and wise kinds of creatures that are displayed and portrayed in there. We have the same problem throughout history. Our students, all the way back in the Roman days, who inherited the Greek educational system, have also complained about these texts as well. This is a quote from Petronius's The Satyricon back in 66 AD, where the complaint is about the rhetoric. The professors of rhetoric are hag-ridden. I'm sure the reason why such young nitwits are produced in our schools is because they have no contact with anything of any use in everyday life. So you see, this criticism that we have and concern about the nature of our education, whether it's really valuable, has been with us from the very beginning. And so we, as professors here at Lynn University, are carrying on a very long tradition, a very worthwhile tradition, I believe. I feel quite fortunate. What are the kinds of things that we're going to have to do as an institution to change and to adapt to this current set of problems that we have in social, economic, and cultural conditions we have? We are going to change. We will go more in direction of online degrees. We will develop programs that are certification programs for students who truly want to narrow their focus and specialize in a particular set of skills and make those kinds of courses available to them. We will begin to use technology in ways that will create portfolio assessments. These will be much more attractive looking documents, online dynamic documents that will record our students' work in visual, audio. All of the different kinds of colleges and the different kinds of skill sets will be able to use these kinds of portfolios to create for future jobs and references and for graduate school to document and highlight our students' performance and abilities. We need to rethink the classroom space. This is a much more immediate concern. We've already done that here at Lynn in the International Business School. Those classrooms are dramatically different kinds of classrooms than this auditorium seating, which is replicated in every classroom that we have here in the university. This is the problem where the information is up here on the front board, the authority is in front of you, and everyone follows. That model is medieval and it has to change. With these new technologies where the role of the professor becomes more of an advocate for the construction of knowledge in groups work and in individual research, needs a space where that kind of process can occur in a much more natural way. So our physical classrooms will have to change in order to coordinate that kind of work. I've offered this last suggestion. I'm calling it the zero-hour exploit. This goes back to the problem of the physiological and psychological problems we have using technology. There is a movement afoot about disengaging from our devices. I believe that Lynn should engage with the disengagement. We should sponsor an hour a day, an hour a week, an hour a month, some time which we designate as being disconnected from our social media. We need a time to remember what it's like to be human and not to be interrupted in being just human. Seems to me it's a very valuable experience that we, in our rush to accomplish all of the things that we try to accomplish at a university, sometimes we fail to provide that kind of space, that kind of time and opportunity. That seems to me to be a necessary part of our curriculum that we need to embrace also. I feel very fortunate to be part of the faculty of this university. As Mark mentioned in the comments, it really meets my sweet spots. I love technology, but I also love these great authors and these ideas. And here we have this wonderful connection between technology and a traditional core liberal arts curriculum. So I feel very fortunate to be part of a university where I have the academic freedom to give a lecture like this. I feel very supported by my faculty and my colleagues, the administration. I feel very fortunate to live here and to work at a university in Boca Raton where we have such a generous and supportive community who aids this university in so many ways. Our leadership is informed and inspirational, I believe. We have an amazing, diverse student body, which is a great pleasure to be in contact with every day. And this is a truly beautiful place to work. So I want to thank you very much for your time. I'm certainly open for any questions that you may have. Thank you. Does anything alarm me about this? Well, in the popular press, as a matter of fact, some leaders in our culture, Elon Musk, the founder of SpaceX and who has developed this set of Tesla cars, he and Bill Gates have recently made comments about their fear about artificial intelligence and how artificial intelligences are something that we should be very afraid of. I think that those fears are exaggerated and have more to do with movies like The Terminator than they do with the actual reality of the technology on the ground. We have been developing artificial intelligence over the years, and for many years we've expected to find these computers passing human intelligence. We finally have some computers that are matching up with our chess players and beating most of our chess players. But it turns out that I just recently read that the ancient game of Go, the Chinese game of Go, presents a problem that the current stage and the foreseeable stage of computers still can't beat the best Go players in the world. So I think that the nature of being human presents a kind of puzzle that artificial intelligence can't really surpass. And so I think we still have, great opportunities to use this technology in responsible ways. I think your concern about how these technologies are used, if they're used thoughtlessly, and that was my main point. In other words, if we recreate cultural situations and contexts which do not really provide the kind of essential freedoms that a citizen of a democracy needs to have, then yes, I think they can be dangerous. If we don't do this as a faculty and have our students interrogate these technologies and be aware of their limitations, then yes, they could be dangerous. Does that sort of respond to your question? Any other questions? Yes?
John, do you ever give any thought to the idea of technology in the wrong hands, in a sense of we give iPads to all students regardless of their caliber, academic caliber. And I think the challenge for a lot of us in the classroom is to sort of trust that our students are actually doing the work that they need or should be doing in the classroom, and that involves the split classroom idea as well. But that just like technology has always been, it's always been questionable, but who's pushing the buttons? Are we matured enough to handle the technology? So I often wonder about our programs and the iPad program. Are all our students prepared to be responsible with the technology in their hands, and that maybe there perhaps needs to be some kind of more adequate oversight in regards to the maturity level of individuals using the technology. Has that ever come into play for you?
Can I repeat your question and see if I've got it then? The question is, are our students responsible as well as competent in using these technologies in ways that they will be responsible both in class and productive in the learning environment? Okay, thank you. One of the changes that I made, as a matter of fact, in this semester, after the first semester of teaching with the iPad, has, I think, to do with an answer to that question. I realized that I didn't give my students enough credit for actually using and developing the skills necessary to use the technology responsibly and competently. I didn't give them credit for it. This semester, I actually included 10% of their grade has to do with technical competencies. In other words, learning how to use these applications, learning how to respond through the Tumblr blogs that they use, setting up those blogs, creating writing in those blog spaces, using the application Evernote in their iBooks, using all of the different kinds of devices that we have embedded in our iBooks is a large part of the technical skills necessary for a student to learn in this kind of environment. But I hadn't given them credit for that before, in spite of the fact that I have to spend an enormous amount of my time teaching and instructing students in how to do that, and then the time spent in for them learning how to do it well. I think in a larger way, this matter of technical skills and competencies really falls underneath the notions about assessment and evaluation. What do we really value about our students' use of these technologies? And so I do think that we have to relook at our valuing of student use of the technology in the classroom and develop methods and procedures to better accomplish that task. I ran into I think the question also begs the question, which is, my students are spending most of their time Facebooking through class, right? They're not really using the responsibility. I have had that occasion, I'm sure that happens, but when I first began using technology in the classroom, I also found myself challenging a student about their using their phone after I had just lectured on what I thought was a very important point. And I asked the student what he was doing, and he looked up at me sheepishly and he said, "I was looking up the biography of the guy that you just mentioned." So these devices, they do use these and can use these in responsible ways to link to the information that they just heard in class. Do they always do that? Not necessarily. Yes, please. I think the comment that you're making is the concern about technology and perhaps invasions of our privacy. Right. As a matter of fact, Lee and I were just talking before this lecture about the news that came out about our attendance application, and this application broadcasts to the parents of students who have permitted this information to be made available to their parents about whether they've attended class or not. And so you're right, all of this data is being collected and made available to administration and to whomever. We do need to control that flow of information and be careful about how it's used. I think it also begs, the question too, that this technology, going back to the problem about the cubicle problem, right? How much of this technology is sort of reinforcing a kind of behavior or cultural expectation that we really want to criticize, perhaps, or be resistant to. And that has to do with the nature of the university itself, which has always been this liminal space. It was not work, it was not play, it was a space that students occupied before they entered into their professions, where they learned the competencies and skills of those particular professions, but were not underneath the pressure and the responsibility and the consequences that those professions would demand. And so we are in an interesting place where we want to provide an authentic learning environment, but we also want to protect our students who are in the process of formation. They're learning about who they are, about what they really believe, about what they want and who they want to become. And so that's a really important part of their development that we need to protect and honor, and we have to be very careful about how technology may diminish that space. Yes?
Tom, I really enjoyed the lecture and also the historical review where we come from, where we're going. It's both exhilarating and disturbing in many respects. But I love the parallel if you think about the 16th century and the advent of the printing press being sort of replicated here with the internet, if you will, and the dissemination of information on a mass scale, obviously far greater than what we have in the printing press, but nonetheless, suddenly you had no longer any gatekeepers keeping knowledge under wraps, or at least being, given in incremental and only with the imprimatur, either by the church or by the governing authorities. But it was kept very carefully, under wraps. Now that same thing has exploded with the internet. No longer do you have the gatekeepers that we had, I would say, up until the late 20th century with the publishing houses. You had the great publishing houses who either decided to publish something or not to publish it, just like you had in your academic committee those who were for or against. Suddenly now, all bets are off. Everything is out there. Who are going to be the gatekeepers, and how are we going to somehow, sift through all this massive of information and decide what truly is of value or not? That's my.
What I hear, Dr. Ludio, is the larger question about who's going to be responsible for validating what information is valuable, or establishing some kind of standards as to what we really value in this information age where everything and all knowledge is available. And certainly under Google Books, putting practically all of the books of the Library of Congress are available online. In many ways, many faculty feel a little threatened by the fact that they are no longer the repository of the authoritative information on any one particular subject. Students can find information from any faculty member virtually anywhere in the world now, in any kind of university. And so this notion about shared governance, faculty have always been considered somewhat the gatekeepers, is a common phrase about who has reached a certain standard of competence and skills within a professional field as to pass a particular course or to gain a particular degree. Now that standard begins to be not just a local institutional standard, but perhaps can also be challenged in a larger arena. And that is something, you're right, that we are in a revolutionary kind of moment. And that is both exciting and a little scary as to who establishes those kinds of values. I think there are lots of traditions the university has to draw upon. The university has been in existence for thousands of years. Will it continue to exist in the form that it is in now? I don't think so. I think it will change, and it will change in a radical way. I joke to my students occasionally, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. As a matter of fact, based on some of the questions that I would regularly receive, how many points is this assignment worth? How long does this paper have to be? I tell them that I wish my avatar was here instead of me. Because my avatar, my robotic presence, would always respond kindly and considerately and thoughtfully to every single one of those requests, no matter how many times it would ask. Whereas as a human, I feel so discouraged and disappointed that that's what they want me to provide. That's the kind of information they need for me to. So I think there are ways that we can kind of preserve our humanity and take advantage of our technologies, hopefully. Any other questions? Thanks very much.